What's up, good people? This is Jesse Leach from Killswitch Engage.
This is Ash Costello from New Year's Day.
Hi, this is Daisy Berkowitz from Marilyn Manson.
Hey, this is Rob Zombie, and you're listening to The Louvau Show.
The alternative 93.9 KWSS and KWSS.org. If you're listening online, welcome to another installment of The Louvau Show. I'm Jim Laveau, and you're all mine for the next hour. Now, over the past few weeks, I've done everything in my power to get you ready for Halloween. I brought you Rob Zombie, I brought you Ash Costello from New Year's Day, and this week, I bring you Andy Biersack from the band The Black Veil Brides, who will actually be over at the Marquee Theater on Halloween night. And those guys have a brand new record that was produced by Bob Rock that hits stores on Tuesday. We'll be talking about the new record and plenty of other things with Andy from Black Veil Brides.
Hey, what's going on? This is Craig Mabbitt from Escape the Fate, and you're listening to my favorite rock show, The Louvau Show, on KWSS 93.9 FM and KWSS.org. A couple weeks ago, I asked those of you that follow The Louvau Show on Twitter who you'd like to hear on the show. And for those of you that don't follow The Louvau Show on Twitter, you should, because this is the type of stuff that happens. And I received an overwhelming response of people who asked for this next guest, so I figured ask and you will receive. I'd like to welcome Andy Biersack of the Black Veil Brides to The Louvau Show. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm in my hotel room, and I've been doing press all day, and I'm flipping through the cable and have it on mute, and I'm just watching whatever it is that's on MTV.
Probably nothing music related at all, I would assume.
This is what I'm saying, is that I've not seen... There was a commercial for a Demi Lovato concert. That's literally the only thing that's happened that was even slightly related to music.
And that was sort of the, the spot you go to learn about bands, and the world's a much different place now.
No, absolutely. I had the same thing. I remember when bands like Korn and stuff were first coming out, and I remember the summer when it was the summer after Pac and Biggie died, and there were all those music videos, and I just remember every genre of music being on MTV. It's sad to see. But there is this great commercial that's on right now for colored hair extensions, which the irony that's happening is that the girl in the commercial actually played my cousin's love interest in the comedy series that I produced. So it's good to see that her career is continuing on and she's wearing colored hair extensions in the commercial.
Well, I think that everyone should have some sort of extra color in their hair or something fun going on to break up the monotony of everyday society. So Bob Rock, of all people, I probably would have expected you guys to work with. How did that come to be?
That's so funny because we really have gotten kind of one or the other. There's some people that I've seen have written and said articles, oh, it's such an obvious pairing, and then there's other people that say, like what you just said, oh, it's kind of sort of out of left field. So I think in some ways it's kind of a little bit of both. For us, I don't think that I ever would have dreamed that I would have even been able to make a record with Bob Rock, just because he's one of those classic producers who's kind of from an era that's, the bands in our world and our scene don't necessarily get to meet those kind of guys, if you know what I mean. And so we were fortunate enough to have a song called In the End on our last record that did really well at rock radio. And Bob, I guess, just regularly listened to rock radio when he lived in Hawaii and had the station on, and they happened to be playing it quite a bit. And he didn't know anything about the band and just loved the songs. And so started doing research into the band and kind of decided on his own that he was going to produce this record, unbeknownst to us. So he called up anybody that he could to try to get in contact with our manager. A couple of days later, he had a conversation with our manager, and I got a call saying, hey, do you want to have breakfast with Bob Rock? He wants to produce the next record. So it was kind of as simple as that.
So did you have to go to Hawaii?
No, he came to L.A., and we went to a place on I believe we were on Beverly in Hollywood, right near where I used to live, and it was one of those moments where, once you get over the initial shock of meeting the guy who you've seen in every rock documentary and whatever else, and he's got, his long blonde hair and the leather jacket and the cowboy boots, and he's just fucking, he's so cool looking, and he's one of those guys that just, he's such a charismatic personality unto himself. Even though he's a music producer, he's just as much a rock star as any of the great rock stars that I've met. So, and he was a sweetheart. He had the right ideas, and he immediately was the guy that was perfect for the job, and it was pretty obvious.
So when you sat down with him to have lunch with him, did you say, if you're going to work on my next record, you can't ruin me like you did Metallica?
Oh, no. Well, the thing is that needs to be understood is that Bob's process is this. He likes to have the band come in and do about a month of pre-production to write songs and to really work on elements of what they're doing. When Metallica did the Black Album, they did that. They spent a lot of time working on the song. The Black Album then turned them into the biggest band in the world, obviously.
Right.
And when you come back down to make more records, they admittedly, and if you've seen Some Kind of Monster, they have no interest in doing pre-production. They wanted to write all the songs in the studio. They didn't want to really take much input. And you can kind of see, it just, by watching that, you can kind of see that Bob's influence was less and less by the time you got to that record. It was really about the guys who were in the biggest band in the world making what they wanted to make during a tumultuous time in their life. So I think Bob really gets a bad rap for that, when he was trying his best to make a record, and I don't think necessarily that they were interested in making that same record. I think it probably took them a number of years to get back to where they're at now, where I think they, at least from a fan's perspective, from my perspective, I see that they kind of understand a little bit more about the band again.
Yeah, it's always easy to poke a little fun at Bob for that, but at the end of the day, the Black Album is really what put Metallica, on a map in the mainstream around the world. And if you even listen to Some Kind of Monster and check out the documentary, there's so much going on in the band. I don't think that Bob really had a whole lot of, like you said, a whole lot of influence at that point. They were already so big at that point. He was, that was such a just awkward situation. It's one of those things I think Metallica wishes they never put out there.
Yeah, and I think that's an unfortunate thing. It's unfortunate that the relationship between them got soured, at least in terms of how people perceived it, in terms of fans. Because they're all still friends, has lunch with all of them regularly, and they have a great relationship. But in terms of how people perceive their relationship, I think it's unfortunate that that's where it ended. But Bob moved on. I think that another interesting thing to note is that he kind of took himself out of the hard rock world for a while after that. He's been working with Michael Bublé and winning Grammys out the butt every year, and kind of doing a different vibe. It was really cool that we were the band that he heard and said, "Hey, I want to come back to hard rock for that."
Yeah, that's really cool. I had Veruca Salt on the show about a month and a half ago, and he did their second record. There was a real huge difference between their first record and then a record that Bob does, because he's into that huge, arena rock sound, basically, which I think actually makes sense with you guys a little bit more than maybe I had initially thought. But that's kind of, I know
they're great friends as well, which I think is a common story of people that worked with Bob. He did they played on Conan, and he went, I was actually on our lunch break one day in the studio, he went and mixed them live for their Conan set.
Yeah, I saw that. It sounded really good. So as far as this new record and the writing process that you guys went through, tell me a little bit about that and how it works in your band.
Well, I really wanted for us to have the opportunity to do something that felt much more organic and not necessarily stripped down, but much more of a cohesive attempt by the five of us to write each song as a group, to go through the decision-making on the record as the five of us, and to not separate or splinter in a way, because I think that sometimes you run the risk when you're making records that, you won't all be together making every decision. And that's really what we wanted for this record, and Bob really helped us facilitate that by showing us a much better version of what we could be.
How much is Black Veil Brides really you, and how much of it is more of a band?
On Wretched and Divine, I would say it was much more me. On this record, it's the five of us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of rock bands out there, that have sort of we're a band vibe, but there's really one or two guys. And really, there's a lot of bands out there that have two guys that sort of run the show, so to speak, and write and record most of the music. But I think that it kind of seems like a lot of people think that this band was always you, and it looks like you're trying to turn a corner now. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Well, I think that you deal with something, everybody deals with things differently, and we've been together for a half a decade touring and working together, and the dynamic of the band is well understood. I'm very lucky in the sense that the guys in my band, they've never been upset about me being on the cover of a magazine or me being on a t-shirt or whatever. They really see it all as a positive for the band, and that's something that is not true of every band. Sometimes bands get, people will get angry at, if a singer is the guy that's the focal point or whatever. And I've never had that with our band. Everybody really understands that if I'm well-liked or if I'm being publicized in any way, it's good for the band. And the five of us, we all make the same amount of money. We split everything down the middle. None of us are in a position of anything other than the fact that at the end of the day, I am the founder of the band, and I exist in that pretense, and I have a certain cachet within that. But there's nothing that I don't make decisions without the five of us all thinking it through and going through it.
Well, that's really refreshing to hear. I've had a lot of people that have been trying to get me to get you on my show for a long time. Your fan base is pretty rabid, and I think that, out of a lot of the fan bases that I've seen out there, yours seems to be one of those that is a little more intense than most. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think if I could pinpoint why something works or doesn't work. I probably have a lot more skills in my life than I currently do. But, I think that it's one of those things where people give a tremendous amount of credit to people who have kind of fallen into something. And I genuinely do not take credit for how incredibly dedicated our fan base is for any other reason other than that we've tried our best to always be a band that's genuine and really does connect with our fans, and we hope to give a feeling and a sense of community to an audience and to not pander. I'm very clear to our fans that I don't sit down with the intention to write a song about you or to sell you something that I think about you, because that would be insulting for intelligence. I write songs about myself and my experiences, and I hope to God that you can find something that you can relate to in that and apply it to your own life, to your own experiences. And I think it's dangerous ground that bands get into, particularly now with the trend of "you saved my life" and all that goes on with bands wanting to be the band to save kids. I think sometimes you become a product of a business of misery, as opposed to being something that's an inspirational figure by just being genuine to who you are. And so we've always stayed that way, and I think it reflects enough that the fans understand it, and they've always been there beside us. We're very fortunate in so many ways, and if you look at any fan-voted award show or anything else, we always seem to have this great success rate, and that's because of the fan base. So I mostly just have a great deal of gratitude as opposed to trying to analyze it. I don't think that I'm qualified to analyze why something works or why something doesn't work. Oftentimes young bands will ask me, how did you get to your point of success, or how do you cultivate that kind of fan base? And I really think it just has to be the perfect storm of elements, and you have to connect with an audience in a specific way.
Yeah, the domino effect for sure. Tell me a little bit about your days in Catholic school as a kid.
Well, I didn't spend much time in class. Mostly in the nuns' offices, but getting in trouble for this thing or another thing or whatever. I was asked to leave. I was told I was not Catholic school material. So I was making the joke at the time I was one of the only people I've ever known to be asked to leave, nicely asked to leave the church. I didn't even have to leave on my own. I was just told, this probably isn't for you. And so, I think it's not an uncommon experience. There's always the joke is the quickest way to make someone non-religious is to send them to Catholic school.
Exactly.
I grew up with a great adoration for the positives in Catholicism. I also really liked the pageantry of Catholicism. If you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, it's like a show. I mean, everybody's wearing robes, and they're singing songs, and then you gotta sit up and get down and sing a song to the person next to you and shake their hand and sing another song, and then the priest has a song, and then you gotta eat some food and drink wine, and there's a whole situation. I mean, they have smoke that they're have on a chain that they wag around in front of them. It's all very much theatrical and very showy, and I think that influenced me early in life because I loved that kind of very dark in tone, but it's very much a show. There's also a lot of stories in Catholicism that are meant to scare you. The story of the Sacred Heart, the Bleeding Heart, the idea that the heart of Christ, if you're an evildoer, will find you and be floating outside your bedroom door at night. You have to be aware of it and all this stuff. These are not things that are all that logical, but certainly things that will certainly impact you, either positively or negatively. The inverse of that is that I had a family of Catholics who were all incredible people who were well educated. My grandmother was a chemist. My grandfather was a professor. I had a great amount of respect for education and a great amount of respect for other people. My family were not bigots. I grew up with respect for other people to do what they want to do and dress how they want to dress. And there was never any talk of anyone's sexual identity being wrong or anything like that. So I guess I had progressive Catholic family. Though I do consider myself an atheist, I have a great deal of struggle with the atheist religion because I sometimes feel that it's an organization of people who are wanting to basically blanket people of faith as ignorant. I think that's not true. I think there's a great deal of love and hope out there with people that have faith, and I think that should be seen.
Did you get along with the kids at Catholic school very well?
No, I didn't. To be honest with you, I didn't really get along with many kids very well. It's not to say that I was never like the kind of archetype nerd. I didn't have the nerdy tendencies. I was just kind of weird in a way, different, I guess. I associated more with adults. I liked communication. I liked education. I liked hanging out with adults who were talking about politics and those kind of things. My interests were always just more in analyzing things and information, and it was hard to achieve that with the other kids who seemed to be very interested in that. And also my musical interests were different. There wasn't really anybody that around me in my immediate area that understood or liked the kind of music that I liked, or just there wasn't really, there was MTV still at that point, but it was certainly not playing rock songs, or at best there was rock songs. It was the kind of the pop punk that was necessarily, I didn't dislike it, but it wasn't necessarily what I was into, and it wasn't, I also didn't really categorize myself as like goth. I didn't listen to Marilyn Manson when I was a little kid. I didn't have hatred for people. I didn't believe that I should shoot up the school or anything like that. I always just kind of had my own thing going, and I respected other people, but I just didn't really associate very well with them. So.
Did you deal with bullying at all because you were different than the others?
To a certain degree, but I always fought back. I was never a kid that, and I think that in some ways kind of it drew my kind of sense of self-strength or preservation. Was that I grew up with a very my dad was a very strong person, and I was always just told to not back down from things. If people wanted to mess with me, I needed to not let that happen, kind of show my strength. So I got into more fights than anything else.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think the thing that's always been interesting about your situation and your band in general is that you're a younger guy. You're 24 now?
Yep.
A young guy who's been, kind of put in a really interesting situation early on, with the fans and the amount of success you guys have had. And at the end of the day, you're still like growing as a person on a regular basis when you're 24, and you're kind of put out in, I wouldn't call it like a mainstream limelight, though, this record with Bob Rock is probably, I'm sure that there's an element of taking the band to the next level.
It's a marginalized, very specific fame. I like to say that, we are very famous to a very specific type of person.
Totally. You're trying to fit in as a kid, and you're trying to fit into the rock and the metal world to a degree. Really, probably not so much you guys as people, but as a band and as a business and whatnot. And there's a lot of people out there, the Ivan Moody's from, Five Finger Death Punch of the world, that hate you, and people that have bad things to say about you. Do you ever feel like you're right back in high school, or right back being a 16-year-old kid trying to defend yourself from these bullies?
No, I feel like they're in high school. I graduated. My thing is very simply, I left high school. I mean, I literally did not graduate. I left high school very early. I was 17, so I guess not that early, but I did not get a high school education. I left, and all I ever wanted to do was be in a band. I moved to Los Angeles. I lived in my car. I was homeless for close to a year, and then after that, places that I lived in were on people's dingy couches or with girls or, wherever I could kind of sit. I always had a very specific dream and interest, and I don't really have any interest in allowing other people's, kind of idiotic, unnecessary, either bigotry or hatred or whatever derision they have for me. I don't allow for it to really bother me because I don't need it. Those people, to me, when I look at somebody saying something negative about my band, I just think it's a shame because, especially for someone who's in another band that's in a position of power, I think it's so irresponsible. Even if you don't like what I do and you don't like my band, you might have a fan that likes both of us, and why would you want to alienate them? There are many bands that I don't like, and I don't appreciate people in those bands as people or whatever else, but I don't go on and on about it, and I'll never be the guy who calls out people in bands or whatever else, because I feel like if rock is so antiquated and marginalized anymore, and it's almost like we're all trying to sell the rotary telephone or black and white television to people, you know what I mean, in terms of the public conscience. Why in the world would we want to ruin the thing that is so specific and so wonderful to so few people and have such an interest in it? Why would we want to ruin that by creating unnecessary division within the context of the world of being a band? I don't want some kid that loves my band and another band to think they can't like both those bands because some grown man can't get over his crap.
That makes sense. Rock and roll needs all the help it can get.
Absolutely.
When not one record in 2014 has gone platinum, at this point, it should really bring the camaraderie, especially when rock and roll is such a small man on the totem pole at this point. You'd think that, I'm sure that people in these other bands like some of the other bands that you grew up listening to, and you have things in common, but they're just really quick to try to knock you off your pedestal, so to speak, or, take away from any success you've had because you're not exactly like they are.
Sure, and the good thing is that most of that stuff has fallen by the wayside as the years go on. We've been around long enough now that a lot of that kind of controversy or polarization or whatever, it seems to fall away. More often than not now, when we go to a festival or we're around other bands, or even when we're in a place with a lot of fans of music, people are more often than not excited to see us, or say something positive to us, and we've had a great experience. So I think that sometimes little people with big mouths get a little bit blown out of proportion, and the reality is that I'm not up against it every day. I don't walk out of my hotel room and a bunch of people are coming after me to yell at me about how much they hate me. I have a very positive life. I'm in a successful rock band, and people come see my shows every night, and I've been able to meet almost all of my heroes, and all of them have said really positive things about me. You know, when people like Alice Cooper and Nikki Sixx, Sebastian Bach and Dee Snider and Bob Rock and all these people come out so vocally and behind my band and said such wonderful things, they don't really have time for bands that I don't necessarily listen to or care about.
I think that's great. You guys are playing here on Halloween. Is there anything special? I mean, every day is Halloween for people like us, so that's kind of what I always tell people, but do you have anything special planned, or is it kind of another show?
I don't know. I mean, there's been so much funny stuff that's been thrown around. One thing is that my drummer is trying to convince everybody that he's going to dress as Ronald McDonald and during his drum solo throw hamburgers to everybody in the crowd. So we'll see if that happens. I really hope it does.
It's kind of hard to, when you're living every day as Halloween and wearing makeup. And would you consider what you guys do to be theatrical at this point?
Sure. I mean, we don't really wear the makeup anymore. So I think that last year what we did was we dressed up kind of in our old outfits, with the body paint and all that stuff. Now it's fun for people, so maybe we'll do that again, kind of bring that back for the night. Yeah,
is there any particular reason why you kind of ditched the makeup now?
Not in particular. It just got kind of, I don't know, I think that whenever you can tell within yourself that something that you're doing is no longer interesting to you, you should stop doing it. And I think we got to a point where it wasn't clicking. It started to be like we were cartoon versions of ourselves. I've never been the band that wanted to just be one thing forever, and I always wanted to evolve and change, and I think we just got to the point where it just didn't really matter so much. And I think that it's fun for to look out in the crowd and to see the kids that come in the full makeup and the costume and everything, and they really associate it with the band, and that's great. I don't know, maybe we'll go back to it one day, but right now in our career, it's just not something that interests me that much. There was certainly time period where we had like an identity crisis, because when one night you go, I'm too tired to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't like how this looks or whatever, and you're in Hamburg, Germany on a Thursday night in the middle of winter, and then you get off stage and you go, wow, I did that whole show without that crap on my arms, and isn't that great? Then you're like, oh, well, maybe tomorrow I won't do it as well, and then you start to kind of over time slowly get less and less elements of what that is, and then you just kind of wind up going, well, maybe we just don't do this anymore. And I think that's kind of where we wound up.
Yeah, it means you get about another hour of sleep a day, probably.
Yeah, we joke sometimes. I mean, when we did do it on the Halloween show last year, we were like, why did we ever do this? This is such a pain in the butt.
Well, cool, Andy, I don't want to keep you. Great speaking with you. I'll be out at the show reviewing and shooting, so flip me off if you see me in the photo pit.
Great, I'll see you there.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Now, there was a lot of great music news that came out this week. Unfortunately, there was also some not-so-good news. Earlier this week, Tyson Stevens, the singer of Scary Kids, Scaring Kids, passed away in Tucson, Arizona. So obviously, the music community is saddened by his passing. Now, I didn't know Tyson very well myself, but I did hang out with him a couple times. We had some mutual friends, and my thoughts are with his family and his friends. Now, on a much lighter note, I'd like to thank Andy from Black Veil Brides for joining me this evening on the Louvau Show as I start to wrap up S1E19. Now, make sure you head over to Facebook.com/The Louvau Show and give us a like, or head over to Twitter and find us at The Louvau Show. See what happens. Someone tells me they want Andy Biersack on the show. 2 weeks later, you got him. And as always, if you missed any part of tonight's show or any of the past episodes of The Louvau Show, they will be available on the Facebook page, usually the next day or so.